Talk about another one of the four macromolecules of life. I want to talk about lipids. And if you go to the grocery store and you go down what I call the fat aisle, the aisle with all of the oils, and they're all, advertising to get your attention, and you should eat this one but not that one, it can be unbelievably confusing. So what is up with all of these lipids? Lipids are actually really important molecules. They pack a lot of energy or calories into a small space. They are all hydrophobic, which means they do not mix with water, which you probably know. And we use them for long-term energy storage. They also help to keep us warm. And we use them to build membranes and organelles, lots of hormones. Lipids are really important for us. The first group of lipids I just want to mention really briefly are the phospholipids, and these are the components of cell membranes, and they're made of a backbone of glycerol, two fatty acid tails, a phosphate group, and then a side chain. I'm just basically mentioning them because I have an entire video on this. If you watch Meet the Cell Membrane, I talk about the magic of phospholipids. There's a link in the description box below. Another group of lipids include the steroids, and the most famous steroid and the one from which we build all of our steroid hormones is cholesterol. Cholesterol, by the way, is only made by animals. So when you see those plant oil labels and they have in huge letters, this product is cholesterol free, they didn't take the cholesterol out for you. Plants don't make cholesterol. They are important for us, though, because we build our steroid hormones out of cholesterol. And we can ask this question, well, actually, it's not really men versus women. It's actually our steroid hormones. Testosterone versus estradiol, which is the most common of the estrogens. Who is really more stable? Well, you may be surprised to see how similar testosterone is on the left to estradiol on the right. And if you think, wow, those look almost identical, you're right. There's only one real difference between the two. Which one is more stable? Well, if you know organic chemistry, this is an alpha beta unsaturated carbonyl. And the females, the estradiol, we have an aromatic ring. And if you know OChem, you know the aromatic ring is a more stable configuration. So at this level, at least, we win. Estradiol is actually more stable. Just thought I'd mention that. We're going to spend the rest of the video talking about this group of lipids called the glycerides. And when we talk about the diet, this is the group really that we're talking about. This is a pretty typical one. This is a triglyceride. A triglyceride has a backbone of glycerol with 3 carbons. And then here you see the fatty acid tails that are attached. And when you talk about dietary fats, generally you're talking about triglycerides. So it's worth our while to talk about them. And one of the most important things about them has to do with this. You see this on food labels all the time. Saturated or unsaturated. Which one is healthier? And what does it mean? I mean, if you ask people, saturated or unsaturated with what? Calories or fat or cholesterol? People have absolutely no idea in general. And unless you've studied biology or chemistry, it's kind of easy to see why, because it is a chemical answer. It's actually saturated or unsaturated with hydrogens. So let's take a step back for just a second and we look at our Lewis dot structure for carbon. Now these penguins, if you recall, represent the valence electrons for carbon. Carbon has 4 electrons in its valence shell. We'll actually go ahead and replace the penguins with those dots right there. And I actually talked about this and explained all of this in my Chemistry Basics Part 1 video, and I put a link in the description below. But basically what this means is that carbon has to have 4 bonds going to it in order to be stable. In these fatty acid chains, what you see is that any given carbon is attached to one carbon that's, we'll call it upstream, right, closer to the methyl end, one carbon downstream from it, and then the other 2 spots are occupied by hydrogen. So remember, every line represents 1 pair of electrons being shared. So for the carbon in the center, this is happiness. It is perfectly stable here. Now, if you have a fatty acid chain that looks like this, you notice that every carbon in the middle has 2 hydrogens attached to it, and we say it is saturated. They can also be unsaturated. And what you're looking for right there is that double bond. Now, a double bond means that those two carbons can't have two hydrogens attached because you can only have four covalent bonds. So you can only have now two hydrogens there. Now, why this matters, if you're thinking, gosh, this is a lot of detail, it turns out that this has real dietary implications because whether or not there is a double bond impacts how this fatty acid behaves. Things like, is it solid or liquid at room temperature? So saturated fats, because they're very linear, they tend to pack very tightly and they'll be solid at room temperature. Whereas unsaturated fatty acids, because the double bonds put a kink in the chain, they tend to be liquid at room temperature because those fatty acid tails do not pack as tightly. So when you see that double bond, that makes the chain a little kinky and that affects how it behaves. So in terms of the diet, saturated fats tend to come from animal sources, things like butter and cheese and lard and meat and